Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and it's another dark. It couldn't get any darker today because we've got Michael Hawley.
That is correct, and but watch out because I watched the Northern Lights this weekend, so I'm ready to go.
We've got sci-fi writer. He's been here before. It's been a while. He's got a new book out called Cryptid Slayer. Rick Poldark.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
Nice speaking with you, Rick.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Mike.
Rick, what's been going on in your life the last few years since you were on last time? Do you write a book every year, or does it take you a couple of years? How does that go for you?
Well, this is only my third, so I don't have an established pattern yet. But basically, my first two books were, Lost World dinosaur type fiction, whereas I wanted to take a break from that and do something different rather than being known as just the dinosaur guy all the time. So my publisher, Severed Press, said, why don't you do something, with cryptids, because you like writing creature fiction. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. So I took some time to research cryptids, various cryptids, and kind of getting an idea for a story and a main protagonist, main character, and a lot of different cryptids to choose from. And I researched hunting, I researched weapons. I actually followed some hunters on a hunt and kind of saw what they did because, these cryptids tend to live out in the wilderness. So you kind of have to know what you're doing as far as hunting, stealth, creeping up on them, not making a ton of ruckus and giving away your position.
And this is Mexico, right?
This takes place in Mexico, correct. Although the beginning of the book takes place in upstate New York, where our hero is hunting a Wendigo.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of like the introduction into, Sandra Barlowe and what she does and how she does it. So I wanted to do a cryptid hunting book, but I wanted to do something different because there are a lot of cryptid hunting books out there. We have The Hunter, and it's kind of like an action, sci-fi horror action story. I wanted to do something with a different twist to it. So I wanted to do a mystery, kind of like a whodunit with some, noir type sensibilities. So kind of like a whodunit where the suspects aren't all human. So what if there was a world where cryptids and monsters and vampires and werewolves and all these sorts of beings just kind of existed and they're kind of common knowledge? Different countries have like a small slayer unit where they dispatch slayers to deal with, some of these creatures who kind of get out of hand. And the reason why I chose Mexico, because I just kind of, before I sat down to write, I just wanted to kind of come up with my world that I was working in, and then kind of the story kind of popped up out of that. Sandra mainly, she hunts all different things, but she specializes in vampires. So there was this big push to get, to slay vampires. So a lot of them in the United States fled south of the border, and they're hiding in Mexico, where Mexico is kind of, they have their own neighborhoods, they have their own areas. They're kind of protected, but they're also heavily watched. It's against the law to drink blood. They're basically rationed out, bovine blood from cattle ranchers, cattle farms. And basically you have these big factories down there called maquiladoras, where they're like textile plants and, different things like that. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was this big labor kind of war going on down there where you have the humans who work the factories by day, and then when, they leave, at night, it doesn't close down, and the vampires take over. Because down in Mexico, you have all these vampires who fled the United States, and you have different, socioeconomic strata. You get the vampire nobles who, of course, they get the lion's share of all the resources. And then you have kind of like the vampire underclasses, and they're the ones who kind of work in this factory at night. The backdrop is kind of this labor war where you're not sure who owns what, who management is, human, vampire, and basically labor is pissed off and they want to strike. And this is where you see kind of although the vampires are treated as second-class citizens down there, by the humans, one thing that they unite in is, striking and trying to get better work hours. And then in the process, you have different cottage industries that pop up, like blood bagging, which is basically if you're a human, you want to make some extra money on the sly. It's kind of like a black market for blood. You let a vampire suck on you a little bit and you make some extra money, and they get to have some human blood instead of bovine blood.
I might let them do that now. How do you create a world like this, like where you've got all these things going on in your mind, stuff like that? Are you a person that does a particular drug or something, or is there, like, how does this all work for you? Do you just got a real imagination, or?
My drug is Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So I'm a dungeon master. I run lots of worlds. I create lots of worlds for my players. So it's kind of something I like to do anyway. So that's kind of my process.
You've always had this kind of an imagination, like you've done this a lot of years, right?
Yes, many years. Yep.
So, Rick, I see that you homebrew, and is that why your imagination goes crazy? Because you're sitting there going, "Yeah, this tastes good."
Well, let me tell you something. The last batch I made, somebody gave me some advice saying, put honey in it because the honey kind of smooths it out and it gets a lot of the sediment out of it.
Right.
But it also continues to ferment because it's a sugar source once you bottle it. So I did this right before Thanksgiving, and it was it basically turned out to be about 12, 13, 14% alcohol.
Oh, boy.
But it was smooth. It didn't taste like it. We had members of the family who didn't talk to each other very much for years. All of a sudden, they're hugging each other. They're telling dirty jokes. So maybe that's where I get some of my inspiration from, some of my honey brew.
There you go. I like this. See, Al, I told you I'm a fine lager drinker myself. I was home brewing a little bit, but I realized I didn't make it as well as I could buy it at the store.
And it's a lot more expensive, too, to make it yourself.
Yeah.
So it's really, you're doing it because you love it, not because you're trying to save money or anything.
Yeah.
So now your main character, Sandra Barlowe, how do you get into the mindset to write a main character that is a female? It's, different than yourself, I think.
Yes.
Right.
And it's written in first person, which makes it really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm around a lot of different women. I'm married to a wonderful wife who actually big chunks of Sandra are kind of based on. I work with a lot of women. I work in healthcare. I work with a lot of nurses and doctors and very intelligent, very fun, very cool people. So I have a lot to kind of draw from. Making her a female monster hunter had its own set of complexities, which I kind of liked because I made her she's kind of short. She's not, she's no Buffy the Vampire Slayer where she's, where she does everything right and she knows every move to do at every single moment. So when I was thinking about how I was going to make her, how I was going to render her as a character, I came across, it was either an interview or an essay written by Steven Spielberg. And he talked about how he always wanted to make a James Bond movie. That was his dream, was to always make a James Bond movie. But, it's typically made by the British. So they're very careful who they let, direct these James Bond movies. So his Indiana Jones, for him, that was his version of James Bond. But it was very important that he made Indiana Jones. He didn't want him to be like James Bond, where James Bond was kind of like this character who knew what to do perfectly at every moment. He always had a gadget for every situation. Indiana Jones, when he rendered that character, he wanted him to always kind of be slightly out of his element. He's kind of making things up as he goes along. And that builds suspense and tension. So I wanted to do something like that for this character because in so many of these, books and movies, you get these hunters who are they're amazing. And what if I wrote about somebody who's kind of new to it? She's not brand new to it, but maybe she's about 10 years in or so. She's not physically strong, but she's smart as hell. And she has to kind of use cunning and her vast knowledge of weaponry to kind of counterbalance the fact that she's not physically strong. And I tried to write scenes where, she's dealing with vampires, werewolves, cryptids, corrupt governments, where, she's not going to know everything to do at the right moment. Maybe she's kind of half a step behind, which actually plays into the whole noir sensibility too. The protagonist in a noir movie or a novel, basically they're kind of almost reporting on things as they're happening. They're trying to figure it out. And it always turns into a bigger conspiracy and with big powers at play. But they're always kind of a step behind and they're trying to get a step ahead. So I tried to do that with her. She's very flawed. She's a little clumsy. She sometimes gets taken off guard, but she compensates in other ways. I kind of made her hard-boiled. There's a reason why she's a slayer. Every slayer has a story about how they became a slayer. Without giving it away, there is something that happens very significant in her life that causes her great pain that propels her into the vocation of being a slayer. So she's kind of hard-boiled. She's kind of cynical, but she has heart. And you see that when she runs into particularly a little girl whose father is the first murder victim. When the book opens up, he's a cattle rancher. And basically he gets killed in the middle of the night. He gets eviscerated, basically. He's decapitated, his intestines pulled out. A bunch of cows around him get eviscerated. And his daughter witnessed this, and she's not talking. So she has to use her mommy skills, because she used to be a mother, to kind of reach this girl. And she kind of has to get in touch with some painful aspects of her life that she kind of buried because of her personal tragedy, to reach this little girl to try and get some leads onto what actually happened.
That made me hungry. Intestines getting pulled out, that was. What's your relationship with your characters? Like, do you hear them? Do you see them like watching a movie? Do you, what's your process when you're writing a character?
Yeah, I kind of watch them. I start out with a basic concept, and then before I start writing, I kind of just envision them in different scenarios, how they would talk, how they would, what do they like? How do they eat? What's their sense of humor? I kind of try to walk around in their shoes a little bit. And then I have a very active dream life. I dream a lot. I remember a lot of my dreams. I can sometimes even control what I dream about. So inevitably my characters tend to pop up in my dreams, and sometimes I have conversations with them. And I'll wake up and I'll remember that, and I'll take notes, and that helps fill in some of the details.
That's under the influence of honey, then.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, it's definitely the honey
right. Well, you're not waking up with a shovel by the bed and muddy shoes.
Uh-oh, that's part of a good book too.
Covered in blood.
Yeah, a little bit of blood. You're kind of going, what did they want me to do last night?
He knows too much, Mike. We got to take him to the woods to go home.
That's correct.
That's all right. I hang out in the woods, so.
Where all the forest fires are.
Yeah.
British Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah, that's me. So do you take standard legend, like when you bring in monsters and like the vampire and stuff like that? Are they like your traditional one that people would normally know about, like if they watch Dracula and stuff? Are they kind of mainstream, as we'd call it? Or do you take your own spin and make a lot of your creatures, let's say, different?
When it comes to the vampires and the werewolves, that I kept pretty traditional. But the cryptid that I use, so it's vampire-esque, vampire-related. It's based on Mesoamerican, mythology. And there's different interpretations. It could be anything, considered anything from a deity to just this cryptid that goes around harassing people, and everything in between. So I took some poetic license with the cryptid itself and how it presented, its strengths, its weaknesses, how it interacts with other creatures. And I kind of put my own little spin on that, because in this one case, there were so many different representations. There was such variety that I could there wasn't one correct way to do it. So I could kind of play around with it a little bit.
So kind of like a shape-shifting Wendigo, ready to go.
Well, the Wendigo is, that was at the beginning. That's kind of the first, she kills that in the beginning, and or she hunts it and kills it, and you get a sense of who she is. And then she launches into this other case down in Mexico. And, this thing, she doesn't know what it is to begin with. There's kind of rumors, there's graffiti that she sees, and she's not sure how it's related to anything, to the murder, to what's going on down there with the labor wars, the vampire, the vampires fighting for parity in government. You're not sure. You kind of have to follow the story along with her. And you kind of discover the clues with her as she discovers them. Or I tried to accomplish that anyway.
It's kind of like in New Orleans, the rougarou is kind of like used by people to kill.
The rougarou. What's the rougarou?
That's French. It was French Canadian, but it's loup-garou. Loup-garou is the French word for werewolf.
Oh.
So then the rougarou is kind of a werewolfish thing in New Orleans, but it's something that people will use to get back at other people. It's kind of like a tool.
Oh, yes. In fact, you see that in a lot of these kinds. That kind of happens in this story. I don't want to go too much into it, for people who want to read it, but it's complex. It gets complex quickly, that goes back to the whole noir, genre or subgenre, where it starts out as something simple. Somebody gets hired to figure out who did what. And then, of course, it turns into this bigger story with big powers at play, a lot of corruption. And the murder mystery definitely feeds into what's happening in Madrugar, Mexico. Madrugar is a fictional city. It's a border town.
Oh, I was trying to look that up.
I got it from the Spanish word madrugada, which means the time between dusk and dawn, which is apropos to vampires and how they live.
Oh, because I looked it up and said to get up early. I'm going, oh boy.
That's terrible. No madrugar for me. That's for sure.
No.
Especially after some honey brew.
Right.
No, are you careful about how you write violence and the darkness and stuff, like the action, I guess, maybe, or something like that, or you just write it as it goes and you're not as worried about it?
I like some well-placed gore, but I don't go full-blown gore. I like to build tension more so than just have, there's plenty of action, there's plenty of gunfights and car chases and other things going on. But if it gets graphic, it's for a reason. It's not gratuitous. I try not to make it gratuitous. I like to play with people being haunted or being stalked. Speaking of noir, one of my favorite movies that influences me when I build tension is The Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. Classic. And just how this guy, stalks this woman and his mother and her child, across the countryside, because he married her because, if I remember correctly, he wanted to find out where, bank money was being hidden, from a heist. And how he stalks them. It's not graphic, it's not bloody, but it's terrifying. So you get a lot of that in the story also. I like to build that in more so than blood, guts. Although there is some of that because it is part horror. It's science fiction horror. So there is some gore in there.
A little bit of evisceration.
Right, a little evisceration here and there. Right. Desanguination.
So do you have a subtext? Is there a meaning? Is there something you hope a reader would get from your story, or is it just pure entertainment?
This one, there's a lot of moral ambiguity. So, basically the story starts out where, vampires are monsters. They fled south of the border and, they're trying to hide away from being exterminated. And they start to kind of create this new existence with the Mexican government where they're trying to go for parity. They don't quite have it. They're still feared. They're still treated like second-class citizens. And then, Sandra, she has to confront certain things because she's sworn to kill them. And then she starts interacting with them. When she starts dealing with the different powers at play, the vampires aren't always adversarial, or some of them aren't anyway. Some are, some aren't. And there's kind of a blurring of lines. Sandra starts to do things that other slayers might consider questionable, but she thinks she's doing it for a good reason. Kind of an end justifies the means kind of thing. And it gets complicated fast. The reader, I think, isn't supposed to feel sure about how they feel about any of the characters, including Sandra at times. And then also Sandra herself, as she interacts with these different figures, human and undead and cryptid, she's not sure how she feels. So it kind of gets morally ambiguous, which I think makes it interesting. You kind of think about it a little bit. It's not a straight, Slayer monster, Slayer hunts the monster, Slayer kills the monster, everyone lives happily ever after. There are subtexts of grieving, bereavement because of, what Sandra went through, what happened to her that made her become a Slayer. And then, of course, she runs into this little girl who lost her father, who saw her father basically get ripped to pieces. She's helping her confront her grieving while trying to use the girl to help solve the case. So at times she feels kind of crappy for what she has to manipulate this little girl a little bit, but she has a heart. She was a mother once, and she feels for the kid as well. And there's some bonding that happens. So there's a lot of complexity in the relationships of how the different characters relate to each other.
This is quite different from your Primordial series. How do you like this? Like, how do you like doing this kind of writing? It's noir, it's darker, it's not like the other.
I like it a lot. It took a lot of, of course I'm a fan of noir, but I had to kind of rewatch certain things and do my research to make sure I did my due diligence. because there's a certain way you write this sort of thing. Writing in first person was very challenging. I've never done that before. I've written female characters where they're maybe not the main character. I usually have big ensemble casts in my other two books, the primordial books. This really focuses on Sandra Barlowe, so I had to really get into her head, because when you write in first person, the reader gets an insight into what the person's thinking. So, she'll interact with a certain character and she'll have what she says at face value. She'll say something to that character, but then her inner thoughts are like, oh, what a jerk. And you kind of get her thoughts and feelings as to, how she's progressing as the story moves on. And that was tricky, because it was tough to know how much to do that. Because especially with mystery, you want to hold some things back. She's kind of an unreliable narrator because she's learning as you're learning. She may notice certain things, but there are red herrings thrown in there. You're not sure what's a red herring, what isn't. So the writing in first person, I loved it. I would definitely consider doing it again. I usually do third person close, which is very different. That's more for an ensemble cast. This is more, there are lots of characters, but you're seeing everything through Sandra's eyes. And
did you use your wife as beta reader or anything like that to get into a female mind, ask the wife questions, or have her read it or anything?
She actually read it after it came out. She's a teacher, so she has to wait till summertime when she's off. So she actually read it. It came out in May. She read it after. My mother-in-law, her mother, read it, and she's brutally honest. She'll tell me, the straight dirt on what's good, what isn't good, what works, what doesn't work. In fact, early when I started writing, years ago, she pointed out to me, and I guess this is my own bias as a writer, and I guess we all have them. She says, you write very good female characters, but you seem to kill them off. None of them really survive. There's no final girl. And it's like, oh, that's true. I never realized that. And I actually started fixing that. Before anything got published. This is before I was published and I was just getting feedback. Yeah, she helped me in that sense. She, read Sandra's character and she loved it. She thought it was the best character I've written yet. She thought it was authentic, and looking at some of the reviews I've been getting, a lot of the readers seem to like the character, and they say she's a strong female character. They related to her. She's strong, but she's flawed. There were a lot of female readers who actually gave nice reviews about the character. So I was actually pretty happy. I was a little worried about that because I didn't want to do the character a disservice or do women a disservice by writing a certain way. You do have to be careful. Fortunately, I'm married to an amazing woman, and I work with a lot of great women, so I had a good blueprints to work off.
It's interesting. My editor's female, and she always picked up on things that I just did. But one of the things, though, was because I would use the word prostitute as a word as opposed to sex worker. I mean, all those kind of things that I couldn't pick up, and she picked up in a heartbeat. So if you read any of my books, it looks like I'm perfect at that. Not.
And it's funny, the words we use, they have subtle meanings. We may not realize it. And it's funny with the whole sex worker thing. I saw that I kind of realized some of that when COVID happened. And they said there were all these articles about one of the industries that got affected terribly was the sex work industry. And nobody ever really thinks about that. And then, they interviewed some of these women, and these are people who work and they're trying to pay bills and they're trying to live their lives. Yeah, prostitute has almost a pejorative to it, whereas sex worker is more, it sees things from their point of view.
Right.
Words are interesting.
How do you like the sci-fi writing world right now? Is it pretty exciting? Do you like the world of sci-fi? Is it going somewhere good?
Yeah. I mean, I love writing sci-fi. I like blending sci-fi and horror. I like both those worlds and melding them together.
Yeah. Do you think sci-fi is headed somewhere good? Is there going to be is it getting more exciting? Is it thriving, or is it kind of on its way out? What do you think?
I think it's definitely thriving. You see a lot of it on Netflix. Netflix has been picking up a lot of sci-fi properties and developing them into shows or movies. And that would be my biggest dream if Netflix picked up, Cryptid Slayer or Primordial Island and developed it into something. No, it's very popular. I think it used to be more niche, but it's funny, as it becomes more accessible and more commonplace, you get the purists, and then you get kind of the the new fans and the purists kind of like the old sci-fi, the way it was done. And, you know, some people view the accessibility of it, the widespread publication of it as, or making it movies as well. You're dumbing it down, you're watering it down for general audiences. And I think you get that with any genre that's niche, and then it becomes more popular. You saw that even with Dungeons and Dragons, very niche for decades. I mean, you kind of had to, you usually didn't tell people you played Dungeons and Dragons. You kind of kept that secret. And then, you know, Stranger Things came out and showed the kids playing Dungeons and Dragons. All of a sudden became very popular. And if you look at the different chat rooms, they probably don't call them chat rooms anymore. I just dated myself. But, you know, wherever people talk, Reddit and such, you know, you got the new people who are just getting into it, but they don't understand maybe the history or every little nuance of it. And then you have the old grognards who, you know, want everything, you know, you have to appreciate everything. You have to know every single rule. You can't change anything. Nothing can evolve. And you see that clash kind of happening. But I think it brings more people under the tent, and that's always good for any genre or game or any sort of thing like that.
Well, there you go. So what's next? What do you got? Are you working on something now, or do you take a break?
I've been taking a break. I have a contract for a next one. It's going to be about a kraken. The kraken, the giant squid / octopus, basically attacking a cruise ship. And I asked the publisher, I started to write it with a different set of characters. And I'm like, you know, as I'm writing it, I was having a hard time. I didn't like what I was writing. And I'm like, Sandra Barlowe would be great in this situation. So I asked the publisher, I'm like, is it okay if, you know, I put Sandra Barlowe on that cruise ship? And she'll be, you know, on vacation. She won't have any of her weapons with her, any of her bag of tricks. And it would be interesting. It would be kind of like Die Hard on a ship with, you know, a cryptid instead of, you know, terrorists.
That's a big
and,
cryptid.
You know, see how she kind of innovates her way. Yeah, a big cryptid, right. The mother of all cryptids. So the publisher gave me the green light to do that. And ever since then, I started writing it, and it's coming a lot better now. Because I really got attached to Sandra Barlowe as a character. It's not a sequel to Cryptid Slayer. I think it's going to be different because it's not going to be a mystery. I don't think I'm going to do this one first person. I think this one will be third person close like I usually do. So it's going to be more of an action story.
So what do you find is the biggest difference from third person close to first person when you're writing it? In your writing, what do you have to do that's different, the biggest thing?
So now with Sandra, you're not going to have direct access into what she's thinking and feeling all the time because she's not narrating. So I'm going to have to do a lot more body language. Her dialogue is going to you're going to have to get it from her dialogue rather than the dialogue and her inner thought. But what's going to be great about it is I can include more characters because you're not just in one person's head. So I can do more of a cast of characters again and how they kind of are dealing with the situation of a kraken attacking the ship.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing to do, to jump character to character in their own voice within the same story. Like that's difficult.
Yeah.
You know, and not to confuse the reader. That's a really hard thing to do, or to do it well.
That's when you usually do a scene change or a different chapter, and that's how you switch points of view.
Yeah, it's kind of the common way. Yeah.
My editor called it head hopping. So if you head hop too much, then the reader gets all frustrated.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
They get frustrated with your reading it.
That's why my editor took over.
That's a different story, right? Well, anyway. So, that's fantastic. So how do people find Rick Poldark? I mean, besides in the dungeons, have you got website? You got social media? Have you got OnlyFans? Like, where do people find you?
I'm working on the OnlyFans for some extra money. But we'll talk. It's just me playing with, dinosaurs, toy dinosaurs.
No problem.
Nothing that exciting. No, I have a Facebook page, Rick Poldark. I am working on a website. I have somebody developing it for me. It should be ready sometime this summer. I'm not a big social media. I'm on there, but I don't do a lot of that kind of stuff. I just like to write and crank stuff out, put it up on, publisher puts it up on Amazon, and then I kind of sit back and watch reviews and then start writing my next thing. I do interact a little bit, but I think anybody who's looking for big interaction is going to be bored.
Right. Yeah. Well, you can only do so much, right? I mean, marketing and
Right.
and all that's a whole different thing, and it takes a lot of time. So, plus, you can get caught up in social media. It's kind of crazy.
And then you got to be very careful what you say, how you say it. And I don't even want to get into that whole thing.
Well, not only that, you don't want it to take away from your writing and stuff. You don't want to get caught up in all that noise. And Cryptid Slayer, Rick Poldark. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is fun again. Absolutely.
Nice to speak with you, Rick.
Yep. Nice to meet you, Mike.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.